Cayin managed to fit the contents of an R2R DAC such as this inside a dongle. Let's check it out. Okay, today we're on the desk and we have Cayin's RU6 dongle DAC. That is a DAC that you plug into something like this iPad mini or a phone or even your computer and, well, play back music through headphones with. And, well, why are we looking at the RU6? I mean, it's an expensive dongle DAC and over $200, and you can get ones much cheaper. But what's special about this one? And, well, how does it compare with, say, other dongle DACs? And, well, how well does it drive headphones? So that's something I'm going to explore today, as well as talk about the technology. So let's get into the fine details of the technology inside this little device. So the RU6 is an R2R dongle DAC. So that is, well, apart from having the usual kind of, balanced output on one end and the single-ended output, and a bunch of settings are available, which I'll show you in just a minute, and USB-C input, it uses what's called a resistor ladder, or an R2R ladder. Now, what are those things? Well, to go back to let's go through a little bit of history briefly. 20 plus years ago, or around 20 years ago, the high-end digital to analog converters, things you used in your hi-fi system, used chips which were R2R or multibit chips. Multibit is a little bit different, but essentially, instead of having what we call Sigma Delta chips, which are common nowadays from, say, ESS Tech or Burr Brown / Texas Instruments and Cirrus Logic, they used chips which used a series of laser-trimmed, high-precision resistors which converted the digital signal into an analog one. And the concept is actually very simple. So if you think of a digital word as a bunch of zeros and ones, and each successive bit represents double the value. So when normal, base 10, you have, each successive, digit, you could say, is 10 times the value of the one previous. But in digital, of course, which is binary, it's double. So if you use resistors of, a value R, and then double 2R, and you make a series of those, you can actually build your own resistor ladder DAC using regular resistors. And so you feed each kind of digital word into that, and into a set of switches which switch the resistors in and out, and you can convert that directly to an analog signal level. So nowadays all those chips are now gone, the old PCM63 and PCM1704, although they occasionally turn up still. Those chips, are no longer made. So if you want to make a resistor ladder DAC, you have to use a series of literally resistors. And anyone can build one. I mean, the basic concept is straightforward, although there are some issues with that. And that's where one of the limitations that you're going to have with something like the RU6 come about. But people do like the sound from them. So let's talk about that as well. Now, the RU6 uses a very small resistor ladder based on the one, more or less, that was in the R01 module for the N6 Mark II portable player. And I reviewed that, and I really liked the sound of that compared to the regular ones, which were based on ESS or Burr Brown or AKM chips. So in that, the problem with using a resistor ladder, even in a high-end DAC, is that the resistors are only, say in this, for example, the highest quality you can get is an accuracy of 0.1%, or basically 1 on 1,000. Now, a 16-bit signal requires an accuracy of 1 in 65,636, because that's the number of volume levels that are required. So you need a super amount of accuracy. Now, in high-end DAC, you can kind of get around the fact that even the best resistors aren't accurate enough to even reproduce a 16-bit signal by using things such as compensation ladders, which is multiple ladders, and old digital to analog converters would use multiple chips stacked together, and they would compensate for the errors in each other. So, I mean, if you have more, kind of the errors even out. And they also use, say, FPGAs to, work at cancelling out the error. There are various tricks that can be used. So the problem is you can't fit all that complexity into something this small. So it doesn't actually measure too great, but it does sound really good. So it's really kind of compromised design, and there are some other compromises as well in this design compared to other stuff. So, for example, Luxury and Precision sent me the W2, which I'll talk about on its own. They actually sent me a blue one and a green case, go figure. But this has a whole bunch of features in there, like it has EQ presets, it has It has a really good volume control. It has different tunings in there and a whole bunch of other stuff I've even forgotten, but you'll see in its own review. But there's no room for that in the RU6. The other thing is a normal volume control will not work with this. So you should use the output of, say, your device. I have an iPad mini here, and you should set the volume to maximum. And that's because a regular volume control will degrade the, well, obviously already very degraded sound from using a little resistor ladder. So they had to design their own special resistor-based volume control for this. And that only would fit 10 steps. So how do you have 10-step volume control? You've got to be kidding. No, it actually has 99 steps in there. But they had to use the same set of resistors 10 times. So every 10th step, the problem with doing that is having a relay switch to a higher level, you'll get a pop, which will be too loud for sensitive IEM monitors. So there's a 40 millisecond cutout when it switches up to the 10 resistor volume ladder up to a higher level. So you're kind of upping the volume goes, and then every 10th one it goes, you get a slight cutout. So it is, I mean, a resistor ladder is not ideal for this kind of thing, but they did it because, well, they wanted to do it to see if they could actually put an R2R DAC in something this small. So in terms of actually, well, features, performance, and all that kind of thing, let's have a look at that. So to run this, I ended up with 3 boxes, and this requires some explanation. So they did end up sending me a case, and let's talk about the case it comes with. So they sent me a nice bright orange case, probably not the most common choice, but you know, I don't mind a bit of multicolor on my desk. Makes it easy to identify everything which is normally otherwise black. So nice little leather slide-in case, and it comes with a couple of orange discs which are magnetic. So the idea is you stick this to your back of your phone, and if you're using it with a phone, it will stay on there. The problem with these is the magnetic force isn't too good, so kind of it falls off easily. Even if I put 2 on, if I hold 2 there, they're kind of, the magnetic force is a bit weak. Just put them in the middle, and yeah. Now, interesting thing is the W2, which came with a case as well, they had a whole plate. I've just got it in I haven't even taken it out of here. I'm not going to stick it on anything, but that worked out much better. A large plate. So their case, you can see it on here, actually got a stronger magnet, I think, in that case. Actually holds on pretty well. So yeah, not the best result there. The other thing is, and this is a problem with actually using this. Now these things draw power from your phone or whatever. Now normally, if we get out the W2 as an example, which has a cable attached, a luxury and precision one, this W2 doesn't draw as much power, for example, as the RU6, and that's one of the penalties of having this resistor ladder in there, is it draws much more power. So actually, if I use the luxury and precision cable with this, it doesn't work, especially the lightning cable. So the luxury and precision one comes with 2 cables, but if you want lightning, you have to buy a separate cable. The Cayin cables we have here. Now there's not, apart from the Cayin on this one, the lightning one, which looks pretty much identical to what Fio shipped with their thing, which I've now you've got the Posca marker and put a C on, doesn't have any identifying marking. So if you confuse things and plug it in, you might with any other lightning to USB-C OTG cable, you might find that it just doesn't light up and you think something's wrong. So you need this specific cable, which will draw more current from your phone or iDevice. Now, I can't show you with my i12 Pro Max, but what happened was at high volume, it just cut out altogether. It was just drawing too much current for the iPhone to accept the output of. So that's a slight compromise with full-sized headphones. No problem from this iPad, but that's something to note. That is, you know, an R2R DAC is not ideal for this kind of dongle, but they did it anyway. And so you end up kind of losing out on a heap of stuff, I suppose, in running one of these things. And you have to buy you have to buy this thing separately. Okay, so putting aside everything else, let's have a look at functionality. So I've got my iPad mini here, which is probably easiest to see it from. Let's take a closer look at the user interface. So we have the volume there. It goes up and down as required. It can go quickly, but of course at about the 70 mark you get the sound cutting out and that kind of thing for 40 milliseconds. So it's a little bit annoying. Not a showstopper. In terms of menu options, press and hold this and we have gain setting high or low. And low, of course, has slightly less hiss than if you use sensitive IEM monitors. You have sampling, which is non-oversampling, or they have a basic oversampling chip in there, which will improve things technically and makes for a slightly better clarity, maybe. but still, I just gotta leave it on non-oversampling for preference. And then if you have the backlight, you want it on, or what timing you want on there, how many seconds you want the backlight on. And I think we want it on so we can actually see what's going on. That's all you get. I mean, if you look at the W2, the W2 has a heap of options, as I said, like EQ and all that kind of thing. And of course, that stuff just does not work with an R2R DAC. It's just not going to happen. There are so many things that running an R2R DAC just compromises. You just can't have that in there. Some people have got around it with other DACs. Either they have a whole analog stage with complex volume controls and all that kind of thing. But this is a dongle. There's not much you can fit in there. So really what we want to know next is how does it perform with in-ear monitors and full-sized headphones. So for performance, I did my usual kind of tests. For those unfamiliar, I did what I call it the Andromeda test, but this is a pair of Rs, which is close enough. So let's use the Campfire in-ear monitors, or most of them anyway, do not use a crossover, so they have very high sensitivity. And that means that, well, sensitivity means you need less volume level to get, a louder sound. That also means they'll pick up a hiss from the electronics very readily. So for example, that means even really good stuff like Chords Hugo 2, I'll pick up some hiss from things like the Aras and the Andromedas and the Solaris. Now, I'm pleased to say with this that the hiss level was extremely low, even in high gain mode. And in low gain mode, it's almost nothing. And that was really good to know for a start. Now, the interesting thing about this is the internal electronics are single-ended only. I mean, you're not going to have a balanced R2R DAC when you need something like 96 resistors to do just a single channel. There's just, again, no room. So the direct output, in a sense, is the single-ended output, and the balanced output runs through an op-amp, which is an operational amplifier, basically an amplifier on a chip, which acts as a phase splitter and you end up with more power. You end up having about as much power as something like the good old BTR5, even though this has battery in it. Although having a battery in it has more advantages. It would be interesting if they could have done the whole like a BTR5 type R2R version of this thing. I'm going to suggest that to Cayin. But anyway, likewise, it has about 200 and something milliwatts of output from the balanced output, kind of similar to the Luxury and Precision, BTR5, all that kind of thing. Of course, the BTR5 is wireless and all that, so it's a different thing altogether. But one of the main thing is, well, let me backtrack a little bit. I was considering doing a big kind of down the dongle madness route and try and get as many dongles as I can and review as many as I can. But the same in-ear monitor hiss-sensitive friend pointed out to me that actually most of the dongles are really all the same dongle, more or less, just with the same kind of generic ESS chipset in there, which is a mobile chipset, I might add, specifically for use with mobile devices. And they just sound about the same as a BTR5. So I mean, for comparison, I basically compared it to the sound of a BTR5. Now, BTR5 to me actually sounds pretty reasonably good for something that's $129, I think it was. 119, 129, somewhere around that. And the only thing I don't like is that the treble sounds a little bit edgy. And to me, kind of the normal Sigma Delta DACs, the normal ones, sound maybe a touch flat and boring to me. So using something like this, the sound ends up becoming more what I would call musical. And what is musical? That's one of those audiophile terms. No, it basically means I felt like I was more like I was listening to music. Now, in technical terms, it means there's more what we call even order harmonic distortion, and even order harmonic distortion is the nice distortion that makes everything sound good. Some people specifically buy tube amps for that purpose, but that aside, it just sounds very pleasant, even with in-ear monitors. Now, the interesting thing was I used it with full-sized headphones as well. For example, I have a pair of Meze Lyrics in here for review, and of course, I only have a single-ended connector, single-ended cable at the moment, so I was using it out of the single-ended outputs. But for interest, I compared the single-ended outputs with in-ear monitors and full-sized headphones. I even have a pair of HD820s in here, which you'll see a review of shortly. Both of those, they actually would power them pretty reasonably, even out of the single-ended output, which only has about half the power. But the balanced output was, the way to go. There was a bit more bass. The bass filled out a bit better. Even with in-ear monitors, even with these Aras, the bass just filled out more from the balanced output and sounded nicer overall. Now, you're not going to get slam. I mean, it's not going to punch like a good desktop amp or something with, good battery power. It's not going to be like a Mojo, for example. In terms of performance, a Mojo, which I've just hooked up to this old M9 for fun, is going to give you more clarity, more detail separation, slam, power, everything in the kitchen sink. But the thing was, a bit from the RU6, it just was really nice to listen with. It just was really pleasant. I even had the Meze Elites plugged into it, and of course you don't get as much bass out of something like this as you would a full-size system with the Meze Elites, but they had enough bass anyway. They have that nice bass bloom that makes everything sound nice. And I just found myself enjoying listening, and that was the main takeaway from this. Compared to something like the Luxury and Precision, now in its most, I suppose, neutral setup, which is the TO1 tuning, the basic tuning, which doesn't seem to have any tuning at all, and a fast digital filter, the most technically best setup, the Luxury and Precision sounded a little bit cleaner and clearer, but a little bit kind of flatter and not quite so interesting. It was kind of like the old Topping D90 versus Bifrost. This was the proverbial Topping D90, and this is the proverbial Bifrost. And we'll talk about this in its own review. And it just had this kind of musicality that had made you enjoy listening. Now, technically, it measures like crap, but you're not going to. I mean, what you're hearing. I mean, it's audibly obviously not quite as good as other stuff, but it just has that enjoyment factor that made listening pleasant. So you don't get all these fancy tuning and digital features and other stuff and an excellent volume control. All the stuff that's in here you just don't get. But what you do get, you don't need all this, all the EQ and all this stuff. When you use this, you just enjoy listening. And that was the main takeaway. It has that ability to make you feel good when listening. And that's one of the things that people like R2R digital converters for, the listening enjoyment. Now, an interesting question someone asked me is, how does it compare to a Modi Multibit? And I thought, what an interesting question. So I got out the Modi Multibit and the old Audio GD R2R11, the old one, not the new one. And I plugged them both in, let them warm up for a couple of days. Someone got pissed off and thought that I just plugged it in and listened. No, I know these things. This is one of the kind of disadvantages. They do need a bit of warm up. Although the drift in the resistors in these are apparently pretty low. And I compared them running through various amps, and generally I actually liked the sound of the RU6 better than I did the Modi Multibit or the R2R11. I actually like this better. I would actually prefer this as a DAC over those $250, $350 R2R DAC and DAC amps. So that was interesting in itself, that I like this better. And I can't say exactly why specifically. I mean, they chose very high precision resistors, which is about as good as you can get for something like this. I mean, they couldn't do, as I said, they can't do all the fancy stuff you do in high-end DACs with compensation and FPGAs and all that. It's just not going to happen. Now, you can play DSD through this, but it's converted to PCM because ladder DACs do not do PCM without a separate ladder for DSD. Now, of course, if this were bigger and it had its own battery, Cayin, that would be interesting. If Cayin did that, not with the Wi-Fi, we don't need the Wi-Fi features, but if they did something that was bigger, which had, maybe even, I think a DSD ladder is kind of ridiculous. I think if you're putting DSD through a portable gear, you're doing it wrong, personally. It's just ridiculous overkill. But say with a battery power, so they could have a bit more power output and maybe more features in there, and maybe slightly better precision, better volume control and all that, that would actually be really cool. So, but I mean, just as a dongle DAC, I mean, I've been enjoying these two, absolutely listening with, especially the lyrics. They're really nice as pseudo-portable headphones because they don't fold. And I just found it just with headphones in general. I mean, obviously it's underpowered, but just for relaxing listening, it just does a really nice job. In case you're wondering if I didn't try it with other IEM monitors, I got out my favorite A8000s as well, and enjoyed it with those too. And when you get into the higher end stuff, I tried it with, say, the DCA Stealth. The DCA Stealth kind of reveals too much. It really needs a lot of power. It needs a lot of high end gear. It's the kind of thing I'd say go buy a Cord Dave and use with the Stealth. But the Stealth kind of revealed too much about how it's a little bit soft. It's a little bit rolled off in the end. So I think, interestingly, I thought that a synergistic match would be something that's kind of brighter and with this, because it's a little bit kind of a touch soft, a touch rolled off in the treble. But actually I found that the opposite. It kind of revealed the rolled off nature of it too much. And I actually I play to its strengths and just use a nice pair of kind of maybe even slightly more mellow in-ear monitors, and unless you find that too mellow. And the Aras are a touch mellow because they're actually tuned to be dead flat. And I actually like this kind of combo. This, the musicality and the relaxing listening just made listening enjoyable. So if the feeling of when you're listening is important and you want a dongle DAC, this absolutely rocks. If you want accuracy and precision, well, wait for the Luxury and Precision W2 review. There are measurements as well online now. Really, I'm really amazing that Cayin actually stuck an R2R DAC in this. It's pretty incredible as things go. So thanks, Cayin, for sending me this RU6. If you've owned one, please do comment below, because not just my opinion, but other people's opinions are valuable, and people watching my video to check out, you know, should I buy one of these or not? Maybe you can check out other people's opinions as well. I think that's a good idea. Also, if you'd like my buying advice, many people have questions, consider becoming a supporter or a member. It doesn't take much, and you basically get a month where you can bug me for a whole bunch of questions, equivalent for buying me, well, a cup of coffee or a cheap cup of coffee. And we have a little private community where we have some really nice people, some really cool people who put me onto ideas about how to make these videos better as well. And you can suggest stuff, and really it's a nice quiet little chat where everyone gets along and we have a good time. So as always, thanks once again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you online.